When two arrogant cops openly mock an elderly black man in a federal courtroom, they think it's just another day of unchecked power. What they don't know, he's not some random citizen, he's Director Marcus Washington, head of the FBI, conducting an undercover assessment of systemic discrimination. And in the next 5 minutes, their entire careers and the department they represent will begin to crumble under federal scrutiny. This is a story of prejudice, assumption, and the kind of justice that doesn't whisper. It thunders. Stick around because the twist? You won't believe it until you see it. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you found this. We read every single comment. Boston, Massachusetts, stood as a city of contradictions. Historic cobblestone streets and gleaming skyscrapers, progressive politics masking entrenched systemic biases. The federal courthouse, with its imposing glass facade and granite foundation, cast long shadows across the plaza as morning light broke through autumn clouds. Director Marcus Washington arrived without fanfare. At 68, he carried himself with the quiet dignity earned through decades of service, first as a Marine, then rising through FBI ranks to become its first black director. His salt-and-pepper hair was closely cropped, and behind wire-rimmed glasses, his observant eyes missed nothing, especially not the subtle reactions as he entered the building dressed in an old sweater and worn slacks, rather than his customary suit. People often underestimated him when he wasn't in official attire. This courthouse, modern yet somehow cold, had processed thousands of cases, some just, many questionable, particularly regarding how law enforcement treated minorities. Marcus had walked corridors of power for over 40 years, starting as a field agent documenting civil rights violations in the South, then as a prosecutor targeting police corruption, and finally overseeing the Bureau's most sensitive operations. Now as director, he carried the weight of an organization trying to reform itself while maintaining public trust. He was the highest-ranking black official in federal law enforcement history, and certain factions still hadn't accepted that reality. Marcus knew the cost of breaking barriers. They didn't just throw obstacles in your path, they questioned your very right to exist in spaces they considered theirs. As he passed through security, guards nodded perfunctorily, none recognizing him, exactly as planned. His mind focused on today's purpose, observing Officer Ryan Donnelly's testimony in what should be a straightforward hearing about evidence collection procedures. But something about this case had triggered alerts across 3 separate bureau monitoring systems. His instincts, honed through countless investigations, whispered that something wasn't right. The clerk outside courtroom 4 barely looked up. "Sign in, please. Judge Harrington's running 10 minutes behind." Officer Donnelly was already inside. Marcus paused at the name, recalling the file he'd reviewed during the pre-dawn hours. Donnelly, 12 years on the force, 4 excessive force complaints dismissed, rising quickly through ranks despite concerning performance reviews. Marcus, new officers like Donnelly. Everyone in law enforcement did. Donnelly, mid-30s, meticulously groomed with artificially whitened teeth and a practiced charm that turned cold when cameras weren't present. He'd built a reputation as someone who got results, while the quiet toll of his methods disappeared into sealed records and intimidated witnesses. Complaints against him evaporated with suspicious regularity, each dismissal reinforcing his sense of invulnerability. Marcus entered quietly, standing at the back rather than taking a seat. Officer Donnelly was stationed near the prosecution table, posture rigid, expression impatient. The defendant, a young community organizer who'd allegedly interfered with an arrest, sat with her public defender, eyes downcast yet determined. Donnelly didn't acknowledge Marcus's entrance. "Can we get this show on the road?" Donnelly called, out to nobody in particular. Some of us have actual crimes to deal with today, Marcus observed silently. Donnelly finally noticed him standing by the back wall, eyes narrowing as he took in the older man's casual attire. A flash of dismissal crossed his face. Here was someone not worth his attention, not important enough to acknowledge properly. "You lost, Pops. Witness box is over there," he said with a smirk, "though I doubt your memory's reliable enough for testimony." Marcus didn't respond, moving instead toward a vacant seat in the gallery. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Donnelly said, irritation rising. "Public seating's limited today." The room held only a handful of people. A court reporter setting up her equipment, 2 other officers by the door, and a lone journalist scribbling notes. Donnelly strode toward Marcus, badge gleaming, authority radiating like heat. "I said, move along, old-timer. This isn't some retirement home tour," Donnelly barked. Then, without warning, he placed his hand firmly on Marcus's shoulder and shoved. The push wasn't violent, but it was deliberate, disrespectful, a casual display of dominance. It echoed through the quiet courtroom, drawing every eye. Marcus regained his balance without complaint, straightening slowly to his full height. He met Donnelly's gaze directly, without anger or fear, simply observing. The way he might study evidence under a microscope. Donnelly stepped back, not apologetic, but momentarily thrown by the dignity in the older man's response. "Should have listened the first time," he said with forced bravado. "You people need to learn respect for the process." A whisper from the gallery. "Jesus, Ryan!" Another voice, softer. "Is he okay?" But Marcus's attention never wavered from Donnelly, who remained oblivious to the gravity of his actions, unaware that this moment was being mentally recorded, documented, and filed by one of the most powerful men in American law enforcement. "Look," Donnelly continued, "this isn't personal, but court proceedings aren't for spectators who just wander in." Marcus stepped forward, then again, each movement deliberate as the tension in the room stretched taut. The court reporter whispered, "Is someone going to stop this?" Donnelly wasn't listening, too absorbed in his performance of authority. "Officer Donnelly," Marcus finally spoke, voice measured but carrying undeniable command, "is this how you represent federal law enforcement? In proceedings?" The color drained from the other officer's face. The journalist's pen froze mid-sentence. Donnelly blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about? Who the hell do you think you are?" Marcus stepped onto the floor proper, positioning himself, precisely between Donnelly and the defendant's table. No one moved. Donnelly stood rigid, eyes locked on Marcus Washington as recognition began to flicker like distant lightning. He swallowed once. Then again. Something was wrong. Marcus clasped his hands behind his back, allowing silence to fill the space between them. His stillness communicated more than words could. Even Officer Chen, stationed by the doorway, seemed to be holding his breath. One moment can change everything. What would you do if the room turned against you without warning? Share your reaction below. Hit like and subscribe to the channel if this hit you too. "Officer Donnelly," Marcus finally said, voice clear and measured, "did you just put your hands on me without cause or provocation?" I was clearing the area," he stammered, confidence wavering. "Security protocol." "That is not what I asked. Did you physically touch me while making derogatory comments? Yes or no?" Someone at the back had pulled out their phone. The journalist was suddenly writing furiously, no longer a passive observer, but a witness documenting history. "You were interfering with," Donnelly attempted. "I was standing quietly," Marcus interrupted, causing no disruption whatsoever. "You approached me." "You don't understand the pressure we're under," Donnelly said, glancing toward his fellow officers. Neither met his gaze. "What I understand," Marcus continued, "is that you made assumptions based solely on my appearance and age. You referred to me as you people. Would you care to explain what you meant by that, Officer Donnelly?" Donnelly's face flushed. "You're twisting my words." "I'm repeating them verbatim," Marcus replied. "Would you have spoken to me this way if I were white? Would you have put your hands on me if I were in uniform?" Donnelly said nothing, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "I'll take that as a no," Marcus continued. "You've demonstrated prejudice and physical intimidation in a federal courtroom, and now you've compounded that with dishonesty." "Look, I was just doing my job," Donnelly snapped. "That defendant—" "Enough," Marcus cut him off. "You do not get to justify misconduct by deflecting to others. This is about your actions, officer. Only yours. If someone crossed a line they couldn't take back, would you call them out? Or let the world decide? Drop your answer in the comments. Hit like and subscribe to the channel if this hit you too." Marcus turned to the court reporter, his tone professional. "Ms. Ramirez." "Yes, sir," she responded immediately. "Please ensure the record reflects that Officer Ryan Donnelly physically contacted a civilian without provocation and used discriminatory language in a federal courthouse." Donnelly took a step backward, finally understanding the shifting terrain. This wasn't going to disappear with a departmental memo or a friendly word from his union rep. Something much larger was unfolding. Marcus glanced at Officer Chen. "Is this courtroom under video surveillance?" "Yes, sir," Chen replied without hesitation. "Full audio and visual on all federal proceedings." "Excellent. The record will include complete documentation then." Donnelly's eyes darted to the discreet, black domes in the ceiling corners, each housing high-definition cameras recording from multiple angles. His expression transformed from defiance to dawning comprehension and fear. "I didn't realize," he began again. Marcus raised one hand, silencing him instantly. "You've had years of not realizing, Officer Donnelly. I've reviewed your file. I've seen the pattern of complaints. I've noted how consistently they vanished. But here's what's different today. This happened in a federal courthouse, on federal cameras, to a federal official." Donnelly opened his mouth again. "I have spent my career watching officers like you mistake badge for immunity," Marcus continued. "Mistake authority for superiority. Mistake silence for consent. Not today." He reached into his pocket and removed a small leather wallet, opening it to reveal the FBI shield and identification. "I am Director Marcus Washington of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you have just committed assault on a federal officer. When the tide starts turning, do you stand firmer or back down? What would you do if power shifted your way? Let us know. Hit like and subscribe to the channel if this hit you too." Under Federal Statute 18, Section 111, Marcus announced, "Assault on a federal officer is punishable by up to 8 years imprisonment. Officer Chen, please secure Officer Donnelly pending formal charges." The collective intake of breath was audible throughout the courtroom. "Officer Chen, do not apply restraints at this time," Marcus added. "Officer Donnelly is still in uniform, and we will maintain professional standards. But he is not to leave this room." Donnelly's face drained of color. "This is outrageous," he protested, voice rising with panic. "I barely touched you. I had no idea who you were, and yet—" "And yet," Marcus said softly, his gaze unwavering, "you felt entitled to put your hands on me." Donnelly looked frantically around the room, searching for support, but found none. His fellow officers stood at attention, eyes forward, distancing themselves from the implosion they were witnessing. The heavy wooden door closed behind Officer Chen with a resonant click that seemed to seal Donnelly's fate. Chen positioned himself near Donnelly, hand resting casually near his holster, not threatening but undeniably prepared. Donnelly stood rigid, color flooding back into his face, jaw muscles working visibly beneath his skin as he fought to control his temper. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. Marcus maintained his position, gaze steady and penetrating, offering no relief from scrutiny, no avenue for evasion or justification. "Director Washington," came a voice from near the prosecutor's table. It was Assistant U.S. Attorney Landry, a seasoned trial lawyer with receding gray hair and a suddenly apprehensive expression. "Should we proceed with today's hearing?" Marcus turned his gaze deliberately. "I will determine that shortly. But first, I want to address everyone present, because what transpired here is no longer about courtroom procedure. It concerns the fundamental integrity of our justice system." He looked directly at the journalist. "You witnessed an officer physically assault a civilian based solely on appearance and assumed status. You heard the language used. I want you to record that faithfully because, when law enforcement officers can no longer distinguish between authority and abuse, we risk everything this building represents." The silence was absolute. Even the ambient building sounds seemed muted. Donnelly scoffed audibly. "Are you seriously turning this into a media circus?" Marcus turned slowly back toward him. "Is that what you believe accountability is, officer? A performance?" He stepped down from the platform, moving deliberately. "You've operated with impunity for a long time, haven't you?" He spoke quietly, enough that only those nearest could hear, though the courtroom's acoustics carried his words clearly to the recording systems. "I've encountered officers like you throughout my 40-year career," he continued. "Officers who enter every room, assuming dominance, who say, 'I didn't know,' when they mean, 'I didn't care.'" Donnelly's eyes flickered toward Officer Chen, seeking solidarity that wasn't offered. "Let me explain what happens next," Marcus continued. "The Boston field office has already been notified. The Office of Professional Responsibility will receive my formal complaint within the hour. The surveillance footage will be secured as evidence. And the press," he glanced at the journalist frantically taking notes, "will likely make this today's headline." Donnelly's face contorted. "You're destroying my career over a misunderstanding." "No, officer," Marcus replied evenly. "You destroyed your career the moment you decided that appearance determines who deserves respect in a courthouse." Donnelly shifted his weight, glancing toward the defendant he'd been scheduled to testify against. The young community organizer wasn't cowering anymore. She watched the unfolding scene with an expression Donnelly hadn't seen in suspects before. Not fear, not anger, but something like vindication. "I've served this city for 12 years, Donnelly said, voice rising with desperation. "I've risked my life daily in neighborhoods you wouldn't drive through. I've put real criminals behind bars. And now my whole career gets torched because of one mistake with some undercover Fed?" Marcus walked back toward the judge's bench. "I'm not torching anything, Officer Donnelly," he said as he climbed the steps. "I'm holding you to the same standard of law you're sworn to uphold. The badge you wear doesn't exempt you from accountability. It demands it." He sat down, straightening, papers before him with methodical precision. "This hearing is not adjourned," he announced, "but the testimony regarding the Lambert case will be rescheduled with a different officer. The current witness has compromised the integrity of these proceedings." The public defender stood, adjusting her glasses. "Thank you, Director." Marcus nodded once. "Please escort your client through the side exit. Ensure her safety." The defendant stood, glancing once at Donnelly as she walked out. Her posture had transformed. Shoulders squared, head high. Donnelly, meanwhile, had gone silent, eyes darting around the room. His expression had shifted from outrage to calculation, like a trapped animal assessing escape routes. Marcus observed this transformation without comment, then leaned toward the microphone. "Officer Chen, please escort Officer Donnelly to secure conference room A. I will be contacting the Boston PD Commissioner and your captain personally. This matter is now an active federal investigation." Donnelly didn't resist as Chen approached, but as he was led toward the side door, he muttered just loud enough to be heard, "This isn't over. You think you've won." Marcus didn't look up from the papers he was organizing. "I think justice is beginning," he said quietly. "What would you do if the whole room watched you bring someone to justice? Stay strong, or show mercy? Let's talk about it. Hit like and subscribe to the channel if this hit you too." "Director," Officer Chen said quietly, returning to the courtroom after securing Donnelly. "Commissioner Riley is on the line. He's requesting that you consider handling this internally, off the record." Marcus regarded the phone Chen held out as if it were contaminated. "Tell the commissioner that I don't serve departmental politics. I serve the Constitution." A heavy silence filled the line before Chen nodded. "Yes, sir," he said, ending the call without elaboration. A murmur rippled through the small gathering that remained. "He just shut down the commissioner," someone whispered. Another voice responded, "About time." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of decades. When he opened them, they held the clear determination that had carried him from the streets of Birmingham to the highest echelons of federal power. He knew this would cost him politically. Certain alliances would fracture, invitations would cease, and the thin blue line would close ranks against him. But he also knew the cost of looking away. He'd calculated that price long ago and found it unacceptable. Marcus reached for the secure phone reserved for federal judiciary emergency communications. He dialed a direct number to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. "This is Director Washington. Authorization code Echo Bravo 79 Delta. I am initiating a pattern and practice investigation under Title 42 regarding the Boston Police Department, with specific focus on discriminatory conduct and supervisory oversight failures." The courtroom fell absolutely silent. "I'm requesting immediate deployment of the Special Investigations Team and full disclosure of all internal affairs records for the past decade." He paused, then added with quiet authority, "This takes priority over existing caseloads." Officer Chen stood straighter. The court reporter stopped typing. The journalist slowly closed his notebook, understanding that he was witnessing something far bigger than a single incident. Donnelly, visible through the conference room's glass wall, slumped into a chair as Chen's replacement explained something to him. His face transformed from anger to disbelief as the full implications became clear. "You're really doing this," he called through the glass. "You're going to tear apart an entire department over one interaction that lasted less than a minute." "Not one interaction," Marcus replied, lowering the receiver. "One revelation of a pattern that's persisted far too long." He rose from his seat. "This was never about just you." Outside, sirens approached, not with urgency, but with the inevitable rhythm of machinery set in motion. 3 senior agents from the Civil Rights Division entered the courtroom, credentials displayed, expressions professionally neutral. They acknowledged Marcus with respectful nods, requiring no explanation or justification. Marcus descended from the bench, removing the reading glasses he'd worn as part of his disguise. He handed the case file to the lead investigator personally. "Begin with Officer Donnelly, but don't end there," he instructed. "Follow every complaint that disappeared. Interview every witness who recanted. Review every case dismissal involving racial disparities." Donnelly was escorted out, no longer defiant, but stunned into silence. His badge and service weapon had been secured in evidence bags. His name now the first on a federal investigation that would eventually encompass 36 officers and 5 supervisors. The courtroom remained silent long after they departed. Not in shock, but in something like reverence for witnessing long overdue accountability. Marcus addressed those who remained with simple clarity. "This is what justice requires sometimes. Not speeches, not policies, but action when no one expects it, especially then." He gathered his papers and walked out, not with triumph, but with the measured steps of someone who had fulfilled an obligation long in the making. The camera lingered on the empty judge's bench, the forgotten case files still spread across its polished surface, physical remnants of a moment when everything changed. This wasn't about a single officer, one courthouse, one moment of disrespect. This was about what happens when someone with power chooses to use it, not for protection, but for correction. True justice doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't seek headlines. It simply appears, often disguised, and stands firm when tested. Like Director Washington, we don't need titles to demand dignity. But when we hold authority, any authority, how we use it defines not just who we are, but what we value. Because justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins in choices.